In 1999, BMW faced a problem it had spent decades avoiding. The market was shifting. Buyers who had built their loyalty on BMW sedans were beginning to leave for something more practical. Vehicles that offered space, height, and everyday utility. BMW had two options. It could ignore the shift and continue losing those customers, or it could build a type of vehicle it had always argued against. An SUV. The question was simple in form, but difficult in practice. How do you build an SUV that still feels like a BMW? BMW eventually found an answer. The vehicle they created succeeded, both commercially and technically, and quickly became one of the most important products in the company's history. But that success introduced a new problem. If the concept worked so well, why did BMW move away from the philosophy that made it possible? To understand that, you have to go back to what BMW believed it was building in 1999. By the early 1990s, something had shifted in the luxury market that BMW's product planners couldn't ignore. The Ford Explorer arrived in 1990 and found an audience immediately. The Jeep Grand Cherokee followed in 1993. Land Rover's discovery proved that utility vehicles could carry prestige and premium pricing. These weren't compromises anymore. They were becoming the preferred choice for a growing segment of wealthy buyers who wanted practicality alongside status. BMW watched this happen with clear-eyed recognition of the danger. The company's own customers, people who bought 3 Series and 5 Series sedans, were purchasing sport utility vehicles from other manufacturers for the simple reason that an SUV made sense for their lives. The company wasn't losing these buyers to performance cars or luxury sedans. It was losing them to trucks that happened to be expensive. Then Mercedes-Benz introduced the M-Class in 1997. This moment changed everything. Mercedes had proven the formula worked at the luxury level. A premium SUV could command premium pricing, it could be profitable, it could be prestigious. It wasn't a niche play anymore. It was a legitimate product category that was only growing. Inside BMW, this reality created a deep conflict that documented accounts from the period make clear. The company's entire identity had been built on an explicit positioning. Cars that prioritize driver engagement over everything else. The ultimate driving machine. An SUV represented the antithesis of that idea. High center of gravity. Utility prioritized over dynamics. All-wheel drive systems that complicate the clarity of steering and handling. To many BMW engineers, agreeing to build an SUV felt like a betrayal of the core principle that made the company matter in the first place. But the financial reality was inescapable. Ignore this market and lose volume. Watch existing customers defect to competitors who understood what these buyers actually needed. The commercial pressure was relentless. BMW's own product planners recognized that a significant portion of their buyer base was going elsewhere, specifically for utility. Not because they wanted a different brand, because they needed a different body style. The company faced a choice that had no good answer. Dilute the brand or lose revenue. Compromise the philosophy or accept irrelevance in a rapidly changing market. When the decision came, BMW chose to build the SUV, but the company made one crucial determination. It would not be a conventional SUV. The engineers didn't accept the formula that Ford, Jeep, Mercedes, and Land Rover had all adopted. They didn't start with a truck frame and build a body on top of it. They didn't create an all-wheel drive system that prioritized traction over handling. They didn't engineer compromises at every junction. Instead, they started with a radical proposition. What if an SUV could actually be a BMW? What if it could handle like a large sedan? What if the company could preserve the driver-first principle that made the brand distinctive while meeting the market's demand for utility? The solution would come from a single engineering choice that cascaded into everything that followed. The conventional wisdom of the 1990s SUV market was fixed and universal. Every mass-market utility vehicle, from the Ford Explorer to the Land Rover Discovery to the Mercedes M-Class, used the same fundamental architecture. A separate ladder frame built underneath, then a body bolted on top of it. This body-on-frame construction had been standard for trucks since the beginning of the automotive age. It made structural sense for vehicles that needed serious off-road stresses. The frame could flex and articulate. The body could absorb impacts independently. More importantly for manufacturers, body-on-frame was economically efficient. Truck makers had perfected ladder frame designs over decades. Starting with an existing truck frame and building an SUV body on top kept development costs manageable. You weren't reinventing the chassis, you were adapting one that worked. BMW rejected this approach entirely. Instead of starting with a truck frame, the company derived the X5's chassis directly from the E53 X5 series sedan platform. The Unibody was welded steel without a separate frame. The entire vehicle was one welded assembly: floor pan, sills, roof, pillars, all connected without a separate frame underneath. This was how BMWs had always been built, but no SUV had ever been built this way. To competing manufacturers, this decision made no practical sense. You're building a heavier vehicle with a higher center of gravity. You're adding all-wheel drive, which complicates the drivetrain. The unibody structure had never been tested at this weight and height. Why choose the most constraining architecture possible? The answer was philosophical. BMW's engineers weren't optimizing for off-road capability, or towing capacity, or low-range torque multiplication. They were optimizing for handling precision. A unibody structure resists torsional deflection. When you turn hard and the suspension loads one side, the body doesn't flex independently from the frame. Everything moves as one rigid unit. Steering response is direct. Handling is predictable. The vehicle communicates exactly what the chassis is doing. This single decision cascaded into everything else. With a unibody derived from a sedan platform, you can't incorporate a two-speed transfer case with low range. The transfer case packaging was designed for a rear-wheel drive sedan drivetrain. A low-range unit would require a completely different structure. Mechanical locking differentials that lock front and rear axles together don't belong in a unibody sedan-derived vehicle either. The drivetrain architecture doesn't support it. What emerged was a vehicle that handled like a large sedan, not a truck-based utility vehicle. Car and driver's testing proved BMW's engineering worked. The 3.0i measured 0.82 g lateral acceleration in cornering tests, a result that exceeded most sports sedans of the same period. The X5 wasn't just acceptable on a twisting road. It was quick, with handling that felt responsive and connected. The steering had weight and feedback. The suspension controlled body roll through turns with precision. Every official BMW document from the launch press kit through the service manuals used the designation sports activity vehicle instead of SUV. That terminology was not marketing spin. It was an engineering statement embedded in the company's technical documentation, but it was also a documented legal and marketing defense. BMW had spent years positioning itself against SUVs in advertising. The ultimate driving machine rhetoric had explicitly mocked the SUV category as utility over dynamics, practicality over precision. Calling the X5 an SUV would have required BMW's marketing to either contradict its own positioning or explain why this vehicle was different. SAV solved that problem completely. The SAV designation appeared in dealer documentation and technical bulletins, a deliberate distinction from truck-based vehicles. Not a truck disguised as a luxury car, not a sedan with a utility body. A completely different answer to what an elevated all-wheel drive vehicle could be if you rejected the industry's conventional formula. The exterior, designed by Frank Stevenson in BMW's Munich studio, carried another statement of intent. The Hofmeister kink, that distinctive reverse angle at the base of the C-pillar, had defined every BMW sedan since 1961. The E53 was the first SUV in automotive history to wear it. Stevenson went on to design the Ferrari F430 and McLaren MP4-12C, but the X5's proportions and profile were his first major production achievement. The message was visible in every profile view. This is a BMW first and a utility vehicle second. But one decisive engineering choice, no matter how radical, couldn't preserve the driver-first principle across the entire vehicle alone. The unibody handled the chassis problem brilliantly. Something more fundamental was needed for the drivetrain itself to feel like a BMW rather than a compromise. The all-wheel drive systems of the 1990s operated on a consistent principle across the entire industry. Every luxury manufacturer approached AWD the same way. You split the engine's torque between front and rear axles in a way that prioritized traction and stability. Most systems defaulted to symmetrical power distribution, 50% front and 50% rear. Others biased toward the front wheels, sending more power forward to resist understeer and keep the vehicle tracking straight under acceleration. No manufacturer chose to send more power to the rear as the normal operating state. That would make the vehicle unstable, unpredictable, harder to control. BMW calibrated its all-wheel drive system completely differently. The X5's transfer case defaulted to approximately 38% front and 62% rear torque distribution. In normal driving conditions, the vehicle was rear biased. Power went backward first. This wasn't an engineering accident. The choice is documented clearly in BMW's engineering literature as a specific calibration decision made with full awareness of its implications. The reasoning is visible in the documentation. Preserve the rear-wheel drive handling character that had defined BMW sedans for decades. The 5 Series didn't feel like it was being pushed from the front wheels. It felt like it was being driven from the rear, with the engine pulling the chassis forward through the back axle. That sensation of power flowing through the rear wheels created a particular kind of steering response and body control that was distinctly BMW. Buyers noticed it. Automotive journalists measured it. It was a definable characteristic of the brand. By calibrating the X5's all-wheel drive to maintain that rear bias, the engineers weren't simply adding all-wheel drive to a car platform. They were encoding the fundamental handling character of a 5 Series sedan into an SUV body. The vehicle would maintain that rear-dominant feel in normal conditions, only fully engaging front-wheel torque when wheel slip sensors detected that the rear was losing traction and the front needed help keeping the vehicle online. This produced a measurable consequence on the road. In tight cornering tests, the X5 showed significantly less understeer than front-biased all-wheel drive competitors. The Mercedes M-Class, for comparison, distributed power more symmetrically or front-biased, producing a vehicle that wanted to push straight when you demanded everything from it. The BMW resisted that impulse. The rear wheels stayed connected longer through the corner. The steering feedback remained responsive. The vehicle communicated what was happening at the limit rather than masking it beneath electronic stability systems. The hardware enabling this calibration was an electronically controlled transfer case using a multi-plate clutch. Rather than a mechanical locking differential that physically locked the front and rear axles together, BMW used a computer-managed system that could modulate the clutch's engagement continuously based on real-time traction data. When wheel slip appeared, the system gradually tightened the clutch, distributing more torque forward. When the roads were dry and the vehicle was stable, the clutch stayed relatively loose, maintaining the rear bias. This approach solved a philosophical problem through mechanical precision. The engineers weren't accepting the conventional formula for all-wheel drive SUVs. They were inventing a system calibrated specifically to preserve BMW's handling identity in a vehicle category that had never been designed for that principle before. But precision always demands a price. To keep the X5 light enough for that handling precision to work, BMW made a choice elsewhere in the vehicle that would eventually reveal the true cost of engineering this way. All of these engineering choices, the unibody structure, the rear-biased calibration, the multi-plate clutch transfer case, required a vehicle that ran cool and ran efficiently. The cooling system architecture inherited from the contemporary E53 5 Series seemed like the logical choice, except that BMW made a specific decision about how to construct it. Plastic. The expansion tank was plastic composite. The thermostat housing that controls coolant flow was Perctic. The water pump impeller was plastic. The radiator end tanks were plastic. These weren't cost-cutting choices in a budget vehicle. This was a high-end luxury SUV selling for $44,000. The plastic components were chosen deliberately, and they were chosen for weight and space efficiency that supported the performance-first engineering philosophy. Plastic is lighter than aluminum or cast iron. It takes up less physical space. It allows for more compact packaging of the cooling system, which translates to a smaller engine bay footprint and lower overall vehicle weight. For an engineer prioritizing dynamics, this matters directly. Every pound removed helps handling response and acceleration. Every millimeter of space saved allows for better weight distribution or more interior room. BMW knew this choice would fail eventually. The documentation is explicit on this point. The plastic components don't fail through gradual wear, they fail through progressive brittleness. Thermal cycling and coolant chemistry turn the material rigid and fragile over time. The failure mode is abrupt cracking at fittings and connections, not a slow leak. A component that appears fine suddenly fractures. Coolant drains rapidly. The engine overheats. The consequences are serious. Rather than conceal this reality, BMW acknowledged it. The company issued technical service bulletins across the E53 and contemporary models addressing coolant system component replacement schedules. The documentation confirms that BMW's engineering knew about the brittleness issue and wanted to manage it through preventive action. What's striking is what happened next. The preventive maintenance practice, replacing all plastic cooling components as a complete package at approximately 80,000 to 100,000 miles, was not in BMW's original published maintenance schedule. It was developed by independent BMW mechanics through accumulated observed failure patterns. Shops saw enough cracked plastic fittings, enough rapid coolant loss incidents, enough overheating events that they began replacing these components proactively on every vehicle that reached that mileage, regardless of whether failure had occurred yet. The factory's schedule didn't call for it. The repair community invented the practice because the engineering's failure mode demanded it. This reveals the true engineering trade-off. The plastic components served the performance goal of lightweight efficiency, but they created a predictable maintenance burden. The system wasn't unreliable, it was transparent. If you understood what would happen and addressed it on schedule, cooling system integrity remained solid. Examples with documented cooling system refreshes showed significantly lower subsequent failure rates than examples without this service history. The preventive maintenance cost, around $500 to $1,500 at an independent BMW shop, was manageable relative to the consequence of neglect, catastrophic engine failure from coolant loss. This is where philosophy met commercial reality inside the E53's engineering. Every system was optimized for the driver, the unibody for handling precision, the rear-biased AWD for driving character, the transfer case for smooth engagement. But the cooling system revealed the cost of that precision. Lighter components that served the performance goal required specific maintenance discipline. The vehicle demanded knowledge from its caretakers. It was engineered brilliantly for what it was supposed to be, a driver's SUV that required drivers and mechanics who understood what it actually needed to survive. The X5 arrived in March 1999, priced at $37,300 for the 3.0e and $44,600 for the 4.4i. These were premium figures. They positioned the BMW above the Mercedes M-Class and the Land Rover Discovery, accessible to buyers trading up from 5 Series sedans, but not competing on pure price. BMW had made a philosophical statement through engineering. Now it would find out whether the market cared about philosophy at all. What happened next wasn't cautious adoption. It was immediate momentum. The vehicle sold with the kind of velocity that surprised even optimistic internal forecasts. Not grudgingly, not as a curiosity, with the kind of urgency that meant people understood exactly what they were buying and wanted it before inventory disappeared. Within a few years, the X5 became BMW's highest volume revenue product in North America, not a niche offering supporting the sedan lineup. The bestseller, the financial engine, the product that generated more cash and profit than every car BMW built. The company's own annual reports from this period document the outcome plainly. The X5 was commercially successful. Period. No qualification, no hedging, profitable, volume generating, driving the brand's revenue growth at scales that competing sedan models simply couldn't match. This created a strange inversion of the original anxiety. BMW's engineers had worried that an SUV would dilute the brand's identity, that buyers would see it as a betrayal of everything the company stood for, that the market would fragment and the brand would lose its meaning. None of that happened. The market's reception proved something entirely different. Buyers didn't perceive the X5 as diluting BMW. They perceived it as extending the brand into a new territory that nobody else had mapped. The X5 wasn't a compromise. It was an expansion of what driving could mean at the luxury level. This commercial validation fundamentally changed how BMW thought about its future. Before the X5, the company's product strategy was straightforward: sedans and the Z3 Roadster, rear-wheel drive, driver-focused engineering as the organizing principle. The X5 wasn't meant to restart that thinking. It was meant to survive it and return to that core. Instead, the market proved something that shifted BMW's corporate strategy permanently. The market for premium luxury SUVs wasn't temporary. It wasn't a fad that would pass when the economy changed. It was permanent, structural, a segment large enough to sustain multiple models at premium pricing. That validation justified everything that came after. The X3 arrived in 2003, targeting buyers a step down from the X5 market. It worked. The X1 followed in 2009, positioned even lower, appealing to younger or value-conscious BMW buyers entering the luxury segment. Each launch proved the pattern again. Buyers wanted what BMW was offering. Volume expanded. The X series multiplied. X5, X3, X1, then X6, X4, X2. The company expanded the lineup with almost clinical precision, each new model claiming a different segment of the SUV market. Within 2 decades, the X series represented the majority of BMW's global sales volume, not plurality, majority. The vehicle category that BMW had reluctantly entered to retain existing customers had become the company itself. But commercial success at that scale created an inescapable problem. The driver-first philosophy that the E53's engineering had tried so hard to preserve didn't survive contact with the market it had created. Volume demands changed the calculus. Buyer expansion meant targeting people for whom driver engagement wasn't the primary purchase motivation. Competitive escalation meant matching features and capabilities that competitors offered, even when they contradicted the original engineering intent. Each generation faced a choice between maintaining the original's philosophical purity and capturing the expanding market's expectations. The engineers who had built the E53 understood this trade-off intimately. They had succeeded so completely at proving a point that the market had grown beyond the point where that philosophy could sustain it. The vehicle that had shown BMW could build a driver-first SUV became the reason why every subsequent BMW SUV moved further away from that idea. The second-generation X5 would make this visible in concrete, measurable ways. The E53 carried one distinct advantage that wouldn't exist in its successor. Throughout its entire 8-year production run, the X5 remained pre-iDrive. Every dashboard had conventional buttons, knobs, and switches. You could understand the vehicle's systems at a glance. This simplicity wasn't a limitation. It was a consequence of the engineering priority. Keep the architecture clear, keep maintenance accessible to any competent mechanic familiar with BMs. Within the E53 generation itself, though, one threshold crossing became visible. In 2004, BMW replaced the M62 V8 with the N62. The N62 introduced Valvetronic, fully variable intake valve lift management. The intake valves opened and closed, not to a fixed mechanical profile, but to an electronic command changing thousands of times per minute based on driving demand. A shop equipped to service a 2003 M62 equipped X5 wasn't automatically equipped to diagnose the 2004 N62. The Valvetronic solenoid failures, the eccentric shaft sensor diagnostics, the timing chain wear patterns, all required knowledge the M62 never demanded. The shift from 2001 to 2003 to 2004 to 2006 separates the E53 into 2 mechanical tiers, simpler and more specialist dependent. This complexity threshold within the E53 itself foreshadowed what was coming. When the second-generation X5 launched in 2007 as the E70, the full extent of change became unavoidable. The E70 introduced iDrive rotary controller and screen-based infotainment throughout the vehicle. Climate control entered the iDrive menus. Audio routing went through the screen. Navigation became software-dependent. The E70 also offered genuine off-road capability through an optional 2-speed transfer case. the low-range hardware that the E53 had deliberately rejected as philosophically incompatible. Electronics cascaded through every system. The rear-biased transfer case was replaced with full X-drive capable of dynamic rear torque vectoring, continuously adjusting power distribution to individual wheels. Active roll stabilization adjusted suspension, stiffness thousands of times per second. Every system had become interconnected through electronics that didn't exist in the E53. The consequence was visible in service accessibility. The E53 could enter any BMW familiar independent shop with confidence that someone understood the core architecture and could repair it. Complexity remained manageable. The E70 demanded something different. Specialist training became mandatory. iDrive specific diagnostic knowledge became essential. A failure in one system sometimes manifested in another. An HVAC problem might require iDrive controller reprogramming. An AWD issue might demand X-drive calibration that only BMW dealerships had the software to perform. The accessibility that had defined E53 ownership disappeared. The philosophical shift is measurable in these differences. The E53's engineering optimized for longevity and driver engagement. Simpler mechanical systems that lasted and rewarded understanding. The E70 optimized for features and market expansion, capability that impressed buyers in spec sheets, electronics that made the vehicle feel advanced and integrated, complexity that required dealership service and prevented owner knowledge of what was happening underneath. The E53 became something unexpected in retrospect. The last BMW SUV designed with the assumption that the person driving it mattered more than the market segment buying it. That distinction explains why well-maintained examples remain valuable and why the enthusiast community around this vehicle continues to grow. The E53 isn't just a used CUV. It's a window into an era of engineering that is officially closed. BMW solved one contradiction and created another. The company built an SUV that felt like a BMW so successfully that it validated the market for every subsequent BMW SUV that abandoned what made the E53 special. The driver-first philosophy that engineers fought to preserve didn't survive contact with the volume it created. For owners today, the E53 represents something increasingly rare, a luxury utility vehicle engineered for the person driving it, not the market segment buying it. But here's what matters if you're looking at one right now. The forensic buyer's checklist. Start with the engine. The M54 3.0i is the strongest long-term choice. Shared parts ecosystem with the E39 and E46 means any BMW shop knows what you're dealing with. The M62 4.4i works if you prioritize performance but avoid anything 2004 or newer with the N62. The Valvetronic system adds complexity that demands specialist diagnostics. Second, cooling system. Ask for documentation of a complete plastic component refresh around 80,000 to 100,000 miles. This single service determines whether you're looking at a survivor or a ticking clock. A documented refresh costs $500 to $1,500 when planned. Catastrophic engine failure costs everything. Third, suspension. Subframe mounting points corrode in salt climates. Listen for clunking over rough pavement. Control arm bushings degrade with age. These aren't failures, they're maintenance markers. If the cooling system has been addressed, the subframe is solid, and the engine is an M54 or pre-2004 M62, you're holding a car that survived the transition from engineering to accountants. Look for documentation of the cooling system. Refresh around 80,000 to 100,000 miles. Verify the engine is not the 2004 or newer N62 Valvetronic system, which demands specialist diagnostics. The 3-year window of manual transmission availability, 2001, 2002, 2003 model years only, identifies the rarest examples, the strongest expression of the E53's driver-first engineering intent. Those manual cars are the forensic collector's target. Everything else is just a commodity SUV that happens to be old. Buy it now or lose it. These aren't getting cheaper, and documentation of the refresh work is getting harder to find. The E53 was the last stand for the engineers. Before that, One car at Mercedes ruled the industry with pure mechanical permanence and forced BMW's hand entirely. To see why the W124 changed everything, and why BMW could never build the E53 again, click on this video next.